You're listening to the People's Podcast. This is JSC Radio.
So, I had a lot of ideas for what the hell I was going to do for episode 100. I actually had produced and put together this really cool kind of retrospective intro of some of, but I can't nearly squeeze in all of the best moments from the 3.5 years and the 100 episodes and all the specials and everything else. I had all that planned to go as what will kick off this show and set this whole thing off. And then while I was in Miami at NABJ, which I mentioned I was going to be there during episode 99, I ran in to a really good friend of mine, Jemele Hill. If you recall back in episode 50, way the hell back in 2017, I talked about Jemele Hill. I've mentioned numerous times, she's a friend of mine. I don't just say that shit just for effect. Like, we really are cool. So it's like her number is in my phone. I could text her. I don't because she's hella busy, but I could text her when need be. So we're down in Miami at NABJ and we're hanging out in VIP. Yes, mild flex. We're hanging out at VIP in the NABJ Sports Task Force party. And we just get to talking. And I kind of half jokingly mentioned, hey, I got this podcast. But I know you're crazy busy because she got her own podcast as well as writing for The Atlantic and doing a bunch of other things. So I would totally understand if she didn't have time to talk to a regular old ham and egger like me. And then she said, when would you like to do it? Yes, that silence is pretty much think of the gif of that astonished gif of my man that you see a lot on Twitter. That was me. I was shocked. Because this woman has basically taken the media world by storm, and she's got so many things happening. Hell, she showed up on that new Little Brother album that just popped up last week. She's had so many things going on that I would have zero issue if she told me to pound sand when I asked her to come on this podcast. But she agreed. So, in lieu of what I would normally do when I have guests on the show and we have conversations, because remember, I don't do interviews, we have conversations. We're going to get right to it. And what I will tell you now, this was recorded on Skype. For the first time, I was able to make this happen on Skype because of her schedule and some issues with equipment and everything else. My normal equipment wasn't fully available. Plus, I wanted to try something else on Skype. So she's going to be coming in loud and clear. Me, I'm going to sound like I'm sitting inside of a blender, inside of a closet, when actually we recorded this from Lincoln University. The new JSC Radio studios, if you will. And I feel this is a hell of a conversation. She's amazing for doing this. And what you guys are about to hear is a little bit of everything. Previewed it, talked about it on social media, but now you get to hear it firsthand. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 100th episode de 100 of JSC Radio. And I welcome in the one, the only, Detroit's own Jemele Hill.
It only makes sense that as we do episode 100, episode ICN, I have probably one of the best people I know on here with me. And I consider it an honor to have a fellow Detroiter, a fellow Michigan State Spartan, a fellow alum of the Detroit Free Press apprenticeship program. She's once worked for ESPN. She currently writes for The Atlantic. She's making cameo appearances on Little Brother albums. Ladies and gentlemen, the woman who invented the Nike swoosh, I intro Jemele Hill. Welcome to JSC Radio.
Thanks for having me. That's quite an introduction.
It's so funny how all this kind of came together, because I saw you at an ABJ in Miami, as I talked about in the first half of this thing, that I was in Miami for an ABJ, and there was a moment where just sitting there, it's like all of us Detroit people are just kind of hanging out in VIP in Miami, and I'm thinking, what is this? How did this happen? As I have you on here, and for one, how are you doing? Because you're busier than most people would need to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is definitely a very busy time for me, but that's kind of the exciting part. What's the phrase that the young folks use now? Booked and busy, or is it booked, blessed, and busy? I think that's what it is. But no, I mean, this is a really exciting time for me in my personal and professional life. And so I think I'm just trying to manage, stay above water. But, to me, even though there are days where I look at my schedule and my calendar and say, did somebody drunk fill this out? Because there's no way I could possibly all, done in the course. I somehow am able to get through it and make it work, and most importantly, continue to do the kind of content and be involved in the kind of things that I think are meaningful for me. And I'm not in that pace stage or that stage in my career where I have to do things for checks. So that's a really liberating feeling. So I'm able to be extremely choosy and thoughtful about the work that I do and the things I choose to be involved in.
How does it, when you think about like the stuff you do in a given day, like how is it that you're even able to kind of keep things coordinated? Because I know like people ask, what's a typical day for you? But ain't no day typical with what you do.
No, I mean, if there was a typical day, then it would be a lot easier to manage. But on a day-to-day basis, it's like something pops up. And I'm living in LA now, and I've been out here since October. And the crazy thing about LA is everybody wants to meet and nobody wants to meet in their office. And so I will, today, for example, as the taping of your podcast, went to work out this morning, came back, got ready, had a meeting around 11 that lasted for about an hour and a half, had to come back home and do some things, had to shoot some emails, had to marinate some chicken.
We will be talking about chicken a little bit later on here, too.
Yeah, but that was today. I mean, and yesterday, I had 2 meetings. I had to get fit for my wedding dress. I had to squeeze that in there. And so, on a typical day, like it is in LA, that is, it is just very rare that I have a day without some kind of meeting with somebody to discuss some project or to, just kind of tie up some loose ends or whatever. So I'm either listening to pitches or in pitch meetings all like constantly. So it's a lot. And the good thing is that there's a lot of people who want to work with me, or a lot of people I want to work with who are very open to establishing that relationship. So even though there are days that it can get kind of draining and I wish I could like sit at home and not do anything and just finish watching Orange is the New Black, that's really not the reality for me. And oh, by the way, I'm also trying to write a memoir in between doing all these things.
I figured the book would be, and the book is going to be something else. And I've watched you. Well, full disclosure here, the first time I heard Jemele's name was echoing through the halls of the Detroit Free Press in 1995 when I was my first year as a apprentice at the Free Press. Like your name carried weight way back then because everyone kind of knew you. You were good for just everything you did back then. To see where you are now, and there's a book there, there's a movie there, there's a documentary there, well before all the stuff with ESPN and everything prior to it. When we talk about because we both grew up in Detroit, our formative years in the 80s and early 90s in Detroit. When you look at where you are now and you think about where we came from, how often do you just kind of sit back and say, holy shit, this is pretty dope, or kind of like living a sort of American dream of sorts?
The only time I even really reflect on it is frankly when somebody like you asked me, because I don't really I don't really sit down and think about, I'm not in reflection mode. I guess I'm still in grind mode. And maybe I thought about it a little bit, after I signed, or I should say the day that my book deal was announced publicly, because that was a deal that had kind of been in the works for months, or I had been going through the process of that for, a few months. And so it finally happened. And it was just like, oh man, shit, this is real. Like people are about to find out a lot of things about me that they didn't know. And just the accomplishment of being able to sign a book deal was something big in itself, because since I was a little kid, I wanted to write and I wanted to be an author. And so to see that actually come to fruition, to experience it actually happening was pretty wild to me. And, when I guess when I do have a few moments to kind of reflect and think about all the things that have happened to me and the starting point to where I am now, I mean, it's a pretty remarkable journey, and I'm blessed and grateful and very humble to have lived this experience. But at the same time, I think if you ask a lot of people who are perceived as being successful, they would all tell you the same thing, is that they, as much as people on the outside look at them as successful people, it doesn't always feel that way on the inside. Now, that's not to say that it feels the opposite, that you haven't achieved anything, but it does kind of feel as if you always feel like you're just kind of getting started, or that you have so much more to do. And so because it always feels that way, I think you can miss those moments where you can just slow down and just kind of be grateful. I tried to work on it and try to have these moments of reflection, but I'll be, completely blunt. I'm pretty shitty at that. So with that being said, it's like, I do have to get better in that. I think we all do. I think driven, successful, ambitious people must get better at being present. And I've always struggled to do that. I'm always thinking ahead, or wondering what the next move is or whatever. And what happens is you don't get an opportunity to appreciate the journey itself. So I'm working on it, but as of today, I can't say I'm any better at it than I was a few years ago.
It's the kind of the balancing act between staying ready, as I like to say, stay ready. You don't need to get ready if you stay ready, and kind of appreciating where you are. And it can be, I can see how that could be tricky.
No, it can be really tricky. And then let's just add the component of just the general heightened sense of paranoia that you have if you're Black. And the reality is that,
there you go.
The truth of the matter is, like so many of us, we have seen examples, not even on our own professions, though we've seen plenty of those too, where people have had their careers just derailed, snatched from them. Anything can happen, and we know that regardless of how successful we may be it financially or be it in terms of platform or place of prominence, that shit could be gone tomorrow. And so, I kind of operate with that mentality. I think it's just the PTSD of being Black, the PTSD of having been poor and Black. So I tend to not really spend a whole lot of time kind of in reflection mode. That's why I said, like, I'm still in grind mode. And I know that to people who are listening right now, that may seem ridiculous.
No, it makes
what makes me what it is.
It makes total sense. It makes total sense to a lot of people, because you almost have to be that way. Because in a lot of cases, that's how especially a lot of Detroiters, that's how we were raised. Because you and I both from west side of Detroit. You went to Mumford, I went to Renaissance. We're like 5 minutes away from each other in terms of school. And in a lot of cases, we had the same kind of upbringing. My dad been retired from the Detroit Police Department for about 14, 15 years. He still works. He's almost 70 years old. He's like, I'm not capable of just sitting down. I want to be able to keep working, because I feel like if something goes wrong, and he gets stuck in that mindset. I work 3 jobs right now. Because I'm constantly out here. It's something about Detroit does something to you. And I've tried to explain that to others before, but when you grow up there, especially when we did, this is the kind of mentality we have. You got to be on it. And I don't think people have fully understood that. You've been such a great representative of who we are as Detroiters. And I wanted to tell I've told you that before, and I say that to anybody who asks me. She's one of the best representations of who we are in Detroit, and in the aspect of we grind like a sumbitch.
Yeah, and it's very important for me to showcase that representation, because you know how it was when we were growing up. Like Detroit, we never made the national news for anything good, and I think it was representing Detroit in the right way. I'm not the only person to do this, but I feel like I've always felt like I was, responsible for doing that because, when we were growing up, the two times you can count on Detroit making the national news were one was, of course, when they released, the ranked the cities of who had the highest number of murders. We were guaranteed to make it then.
Yeah.
The other time where we made the news was Devil's Night. So it was one of those two, it was both of those instances when Detroit usually made the news. I mean, people did not come to Detroit to do positive stories or to talk about how things were going. Now, a lot of times things weren't going that well, but nevertheless, I think the entire country had this perception of not only what it was like in Detroit, but what comes out of Detroit. And so it was always important to me to show people what Detroit was really about, and that there are great things that come out of the city. And there's a certain grind, as you said, and character and grit and toughness that we have that makes us unique to how others were raised in different parts of the country. And there's, some relatability there with probably any urban city, but at the same time, there is some special stuff that is, that comes out of Detroit and that is made there. I mean, it always, I used to get offended by it, but now I guess, I don't really care anymore, but it would tick me off when, people would ask me where I was from and I say, oh, I'm from Detroit. And they say, you are? Like, they're so shocked because they can't believe that somebody with some sense is coming out of Detroit. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of how we get down. You know what I'm saying? So I always considered it to be I wouldn't even call it a responsibility, but I considered it to be my obligation to show the rest of the country about what we were about.
It's so interesting when you say that, because I've gotten the same thing. It's like, so wait, when you say you're from Detroit, you mean like the area? Like, no, fam, like Rosedale Park, like the city.
Right.
I grew up like right off Schoolcraft, homie. Like, I'm right there. I'm from the city, and they seem kind of astonished. And I don't think because the last time I talked to you, at least when I was still working in Michigan, you were I think you were Grand Marshal at MSU's homecoming, and we're both Spartans. And that's the other thing. I remember it's like back in the day, it's like the biggest arguments I would see you get into on Twitter would be with Michigan fans. It's like those are like it's like pining for the good old days with some of that. But we're both Spartans. And I just saw it earlier as we're recording this, that MSU's been through enough. A lot of their own self-inflicted wounds with Nassar and everything else. And as a Spartan, that's the toughest part these days, is that when I talk about MSU, it's like Nassar comes up. And how did this happen in your school? And I know you've talked about this before and others, but when you see, like, when you think about your MSU experience, how do you contrast it with what's going on now? Because I don't make any excuses for what they're doing. I go right after my alma mater all the time our alma mater all the time about that. How do you feel as an alum when you see this, what's going on at MSU and this culture of silencing and all these shady, weird things surrounding Nassar and at times the athletic department and the university?
Well, like you, I wasn't going to make any excuses for the leadership at Michigan State and for the code of silence that you're referring to. What I didn't want to do is to get so caught up in my love for the university that it came at the expense of understanding that there are scores of women that went through a real tragedy and a real nightmare and who were violated, who Michigan State failed to protect. And that can never, my love for Michigan State cannot, supersede that. And I remember when Penn State went through all the things that they did when, with Jerry Sandusky. And I just remember looking at the students and even hearing what some of the alums would say and just being kind of appalled.
Oh, yeah.
That they were just so tone deaf. And I can tell you from firsthand knowledge, I was scheduled. It was just a coincidence. I was scheduled to speak at Michigan State shortly after Nassar was sentenced. And I was very proud because the conversation among the students, among faculty, administrators, was about accountability. Like, they were pissed at MSU's leadership. And wanted, and they were just as disgusted and disillusioned as people who didn't even go there were. Now, that being said, I also, one of the messages I delivered while I was there is that certainly hold leadership accountable, keep the victims in prayer or in your thoughts, and do as much as you can from a support standpoint to make sure that they're supported, but also that the women you don't know who haven't come forward are supported, and that that if they're, of course, we hope nothing like that ever happens again, but just creating an atmosphere so that can't happen again. And so, but the other part of my message was that, look, Larry Nassar deserves to burn in hell a few times, but Larry Nassar is not going to make me feel ashamed about going to Michigan State. And I'm not going to give him that power to make me look at my degree any differently, because the reality is that I had some of the best times in my life at Michigan State. I met some of my best friends. I grew into a competent adult at Michigan State. I learned to critically think at Michigan State. A lot of great things in my life happened as a result of me going to Michigan State. And so I'm not going to be embarrassed about that, and let Larry Nassar take those memories and take that experience from me. And they shouldn't either. The way you combat or reconcile what happened, again, is to really take the responsibility seriously that something like that can never happen again.
You show a lot of resolve. And just the time I've known you and everything I see from you, it takes a lot of resolve to put up with a lot of the shit you deal with online. A lot, I'm sure, that I can't imagine this. And now that I've got you here, I can honestly ask you this. Back when I did episode 50, it was talking about stick to sports, and it was right around the time of the whole blow up with Trump and everything else. And I would love to know, what was that like for you? Because you handled that so much better than a lot of people would have. And I remember seeing the outpouring of support. Of course, I was one of the people, it's a big outpouring of support. For you, what was that like, being at the center of that, being, I would say, like the eye of that hurricane when all this kind of really came together?
Well, I think the worst part of it was not that the president thought I should be fired. Or that the White House, that was just their general position between him and Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Like that really, I didn't really care. I mean, personally, but if anything, I was just truly amused because given the scope of what a president has to do, and think about the fact that he would give a shit about what somebody at ESPN said, is like, that just speaks to his level of narcissism. So beyond that part of it, I think the tough part was seeing how my situation impacted everything else around me and everyone else around me. And overnight, it just kind of changed just the perception of who I was. And, it changed a lot of things in my life, where some of which have been good things. To be perfectly honest, but what I didn't like was some of the collateral damage that happened as a result. We were in the process of, as I was hosting the 6 o'clock Sports Center then. Yeah. And we were having a lot of internal issues because we were trying to get the show in a good place and get it right and figure out what our sweet spot was. We had only had the position. We had gotten it in February 2017. When this Trump thing happens, that was October. So we're talking about a span of 6 to 8 months. And so there's barely any time for us to kind of really get into a groove. And then this happens. And it not only impacts how our show is seen, it impacts what people say about it. It impacted what people said about Mike and I as a partnership. It impacted, really just like everything. And for him to have to be put in the position to man the show without me when I got suspended eventually, and just have to answer questions about me, and all of my colleagues are suddenly, they're getting blown up and people wanting to know what was going on. It was just a lot of collateral damage. And, my mom having to see not just the president, like criticize me, but I was a talking point and a topic for a lot of shows, and I was a walking think piece. And while again, I can retreat inside of my bubble, the bubble of myself, and be okay. But for everybody else, I think it was much harder to do that. So yeah, I mean, that was sort of, I was just kind of dealing with the aftermath and the momentous, just how it became such a moment in media history. Honestly, it was just like, this is not something that had ever happened before in this way. And so, yeah, I mean, and then it was new things in my life that were realities of, the first time I made a public appearance after I was suspended. I had to have.
How was that?
Yeah, I mean, I had security. I was, bringing it full circle. I was at the Giants game in New York. So, and it was something that had, we had planned for a while, because my fiance is a huge Lions fan. And, me, him, and his father and another friend of mine, we had all planned on this outing. And so, to have security there, I had a relationship with his dad, but I wouldn't blame his dad if you're thinking, like, what are you getting yourself into with somebody who needs security, right? So, while I was on TV every day, and of course I was used to people recognizing me, and that wasn't necessarily a problem, but now they were recognizing me for something different. So I sort of went through this anxiety of, okay, is this person who's staring at me, are they staring at me because they recognize me? Are they staring at me because they like to go upside my head because I said something about Donald Trump? Are they like, I'm going through this mental exercise, just kind of wherever I'm going, just trying to figure out just how to act normal. And so, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it stressful as much as it was just surreal.
It sounds like it was surreal. And I watching it from the outside, I couldn't picture. I had only a half of, maybe a third of a notion of what that could be like. But yeah, you're walking around security, unable to go to lineman. I mean, I know your fiance. We worked together at one point in time, and I'm sure that had to be something different for him too. And it's like everybody in your orbit kind of gets affected by this, and you have to be able to try to push through it and hope that you're able to weather the storm, which you did. Because now you're at the Atlantic now. We all know about what happened with ESPN. I know there's no need to rehash that. But I was kind of I read up on some of your other stuff from the Atlantic. And as we talk about this, I was reading about the Dan Le Batard thing from a few weeks ago, for example, and how something here that as I'm reading it very clearly, just so I can make sure for the people listening, I understand why sports fans don't want their favorite personalities breaking down the pros and cons of universal health care and tackling immigration reform on SportsCenter. But is condemning racism, even if it means condemning a political figure, really a political issue? Racism is an issue of morality, and it's something commentators can be trusted to see with their own eyes. That Le Batard denounced a racist statement shouldn't be upsetting. Now, that makes sense to people like you and me, because I hear that and I think the same thing. It's like, it's not political to say racism is bad. But there's still this whole stick to sports crew. You laid it out there very adeptly in this piece. But for people who still may be on that stick to sports bandwagon, how should we be able to balance the two, considering this is a very, I hate the usage of this word, but a very polarizing time and a polarizing topic. But how do we talk about something that used to be very, pardon the pun, black and white, racism, and how do we talk about it without people getting super bent out of shape? Or maybe we should just go straight at them with it.
I think it's pretty impossible to talk about it without people feeling defensive, because ultimately there's a lot of people who feel as if they're being personally attacked if, within any conversation about race or racism. And I think the tough part is that when you're in sports, to a lot of people, you are their entertainment. I mean, you are their escape. And I do recognize that, and I understand that feeling. And that sense of escapism is probably heightened even more now because, I mean, let's be honest, every 5 minutes we're being traumatized by this president. I mean, in some kind of way, like it just
5 minutes. Hell, it's like every 30 seconds, depending on the day.
It's always something. So there is, there's always some huge atrocity, like right around the corner, or something that's like happening. And with that being the case, people are clinging more to their escape, to whatever their escapes are, probably more so than I've seen at any point in my media career. I mean, in regards to sports. But I think what people have to understand is that while there have been advances, the times, are different. Technology has made things a lot different. Is that they need to remember when Muhammad Ali was taking his stance against the Vietnam War, there was a lot of people who had an opportunity to side with him that didn't. And years later, maybe they did. And I don't know if they ever admitted, that they didn't at first. I mean, he was very hated. He was very polarizing. And people were both siding that thing to high heaven. And history turned out to be right. And, don't wait until history is already decide to have some kind of moral courage about it. The time to have it is now. And so exactly. I say all that to say is that you never could divorce sports from politics. You never could divorce it from racial and social issues. It was just as present. I think a lot of people just wanted to believe that sports was somehow different, and it never has been that way.
Absolutely.
It may have led the way in many regards. I mean, if you think about the fact that Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball in 1947, which was almost 20 years or so before the Civil Rights Act passed, it has been in that position before, and will continue to be in that position because sports is actually one of the few things, if not the only thing, that we all do together. Is that, we worship separately, we eat with people who look like us. The thing that forces us to mix is fandom, sports, teams, leagues.
Oh, yes.
So that should be viewed as a beautiful opportunity as opposed to, something else. So I think a lot of times, while I understand people's need to escape, there's also another group of people who are just frankly just being totally intellectually dishonest. And it's because it's not that they care that sports or politics are mixed together or that sports and social issues are mixed together. It's just they don't believe in the issue or they disagree with the politics being shown. I mean, look, Tim Tebow, a few years ago when he was still playing, I mean, he cut a pro-life ad, a Super Bowl ad with his mother.
Yep.
And I actually thought that was quite courageous because, you want to talk about a thorny issue. Abortion is one. And so, and whether you agree with him or not, I mean, the fact is he kind of made his conviction known. And I thought that was pretty powerful, even though I may not agree with his politics. So, who are we to tell these athletes that they can't leverage their position to speak for something more meaningful to them, especially when you think about the sacrifices that they've made to be a part of that sport? That's part of what they work for, is to get to a point where they can start using their platform selfishly. And we should be encouraging them to use it in a way that they feel like can take advantage of what I was talking about the fact that sports brings people together, because it does. Why is it now the time to talk about race? The way people respond to it, sometimes they act as if, LeBron James is dribbling up the court and he gets to half court and just calls a timeout and said, all right, everybody, let's talk about institutional racism. I mean, that's not really how that happens. I mean, the ways that they tend to demonstrate and speak to these issues is so minuscule in the grand scheme of things. Like, it's not interrupting your fantasy football team. It's not stopping the result of the game. It's forcing you, while they have your attention, to, for a few minutes, put something on your mind or leave you with something that maybe after the game that you can think about. And, but I find that people aren't really honest about the reasons that they kind of disagree with it. People who have an issue with Colin Kaepernick and him taking a knee, they don't care much more about the military than they did 10 years ago. They don't care about.
You must know. I was coming to that too.
Yeah,
they
don't care about, veterans and the military, and suddenly, they are putting on for the national anthem, all important symbols, and I get it. But the root of the disgust aimed at him was never about the flag. I think the root of it was the fact that, you know this as well as I do, whenever there's a case of police brutality, it turns into a both sides thing.
Yep.
And there's a lot of people who are completely okay with unarmed Black people getting murdered by the police or getting their ass whipped by the police because it makes them feel safer. And that's the part they don't want to deal with, is that that's the function of the police largely for African Americans and Black and brown people. That function has been to suppress us. That has been the function.
It is so interesting when you say that. My dad was a cop in Detroit for 33 years. And I always tell this story because I think it's like it's one of the funniest moments, but then it got very real very fast. Is I come back to their house one day, this is a few years ago, and I find out my dad's been going through my crates of my old hip hop albums because he started listening to them because he had time. And I come back to their house and they live in Southfield, just on the other side of 9 Mile. I pull up in their driveway and my dad is listening to NWA. Something he would never let me listen to as a kid. There's a funnier story I'll eventually tell you about my first NWA experience, but I pull up and he's listening to Fuck the Police. And I didn't know what to think because my dad has never heard or said much about this. And I walked up to him and I said, so you just going to sit here and listen to this? And he's like, I dig the song. This is at this point, it's like a 25, 26-year-old. He's like, I dig the song. It's like, and I said, it's like, you don't feel weird at all listening to a song basically dissing you for being a cop. And my dad looks at me just deadpan, and he grew up Southwest Detroit. He was 17 years old when the riots happened. They were not that far away from where he lived. And he went through all sorts of shit with the police department and white officers hazing him and leaving him alone during traffic stops and putting sugar in gas tanks. So he looks at me and says with a straight face, he says, look, I was a cop for 33 years. I've been my whole life. And he sat back and I said, well, damn. Well, if we're going to do that, you might as well go to the next track on here too. But that's my pop is old school Detroit. And I've always thought about that, is that when people try to justify cops jumping on us, there are Black officers. I know it's hard to believe for some people. There are Black officers who are highly conflicted by this, and they don't believe all this shit. And they see it going on, and they have this weird. Now, there's some Black officers who are just like, screw it, I'm in on it too, and still complied. And I'm fearing for my life and all this nonsense. I heard a guy on Michael Smerconish's show at my day job, Michael Smerconish's show, trying to justify Eric Garner getting killed, saying, well, he's selling loose cigarettes, but it was tax revenue, and he was stealing from the taxpayers. Like the mental gymnastics that are used to express and explain away why we should be just cool with this, the other side of an argument, the wrong side of the argument. And for Colin Kaepernick to effectively sacrifice his career, because this is the latest piece for The Atlantic that has gotten a whole lot of people hot and bothered about Jay-Z, is what Kaepernick did. He effectively sacrificed his career. He was just like Muhammad Ali when he got stripped of the title, or John Carlos and Tommy Smith and Jesse Owens and all these. He's one of those figures now. But with this thing with Jay-Z, it's so thorny. And I think you handled it perfectly in the piece that you wrote. I know people don't like to read past the headlines, but the piece that you wrote lays out it's not as simple as just saying he's a sellout. You even said he's not a sellout.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I know this is a word that is often lost and drowned out in at times like this in particular, where there's a lot of conversations, a lot of opinions flying around, but it really is a nuanced issue. And yeah, I mean, it's a very nuanced issue because you're talking about Colin Kaepernick, somebody very well respected, obviously, by a lot of people, but in particular in the Black community, and Jay-Z, somebody who has an enormous amount of credibility, cachet, and commitment to our community. And so it's not quite, it's funny because like I understand, some people are like maybe a Malcolm Martin, but like the philosophies are even closer. Like Malcolm and Martin, you talk about different religions. Like there was a lot of, at least in the beginning, kind of as they both were rising to prominence in the movement. I mean, there are, a lot of differences because, as everybody knows, Martin Luther King Jr. was all about nonviolent, peaceful protests. Malcolm X was like, I'm about picking that gat up and protecting yourself. So
by any means necessary. That wasn't just a tagline.
No, it wasn't. That was like his way of life. And so they were very different in a lot of philosophical and ideological ways. Jay-Z and Colin Kaepernick are not that different. But the difference is method and what we see. And this is something that Black people have been, as we've tried to fight for advancement, have been dealing with for a really long time is it better, particularly as we have been able to gain more wealth, or some of us have been able to gain more wealth and more prominence, within certain structures, is it better to work from within and try to change the culture and the system? Or is the only thing that's effective is doing what Colin Kaepernick did and applying pressure from the outside, and a more forceful, anti-cooperative way of doing things. And so that part of it was on display. But I think for me, I mean, the crux of what I come back to is that as much respect as I have for Jay-Z and what he's done with not just his career, but his life and how he's risen to be and become one of the most successful men in America, not just a hip hop artist, is that I just felt as if he kind of forgot what the real fight was about. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, Jay-Z's trying to affect change. Well, he was already doing that. He didn't need the NFL to do that. I mean, he has been a part of many social justice causes. Everybody's seen the headline about how him and Beyonce provided bail money for the protesters in Louisiana, I think it was, about, how they've come to the aid of so many people. He's had a docuseries about Trayvon Martin, another documentary about what Meek Mill went through in the criminal justice system. Khalif Browder, like, he's been on the forefront of this work for a while. The NFL needed him for credibility in this area, not the other way around. So that's like one thing that you're just giving them, which is you're lending an organization who does not deserve to have any level of credibility or any that only deserves to be doubted in this particular area. You're giving them something that is really precious, and that's your relationship with your community, which you have to come back to. And they're not worth it. They have not proven to be because of the way they treated Colin Kaepernick. And my thing is, like, to the people who are just saying, like, well, Jay-Z, he can affect change in the NFL. How? He's not an owner. Okay, these are 32 individual billionaires who don't like to be told what to do. Nope. And unless he has some other big joker that we don't know about, which it doesn't appear that he does, he's not going to tell Jerry Jones that he's wrong or he needs to change his attitude, that he would cut a player that knelt. The NFL has a policy that will fine players if they kneel for the anthem, fine players and teams. Jay-Z ain't changing that. Okay. All right. Jay-Z is also not going to be able to change the fact that there is a glass ceiling for Black GMs. There's not enough Black GMs, for one.
Nope.
No Black owners. So he's not changing any of that. It's the NFL structure that needs to be challenged. See, when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, he wasn't taking a knee so that the NFL could fix police brutality. He was taking a knee so that those of us watching football, we become more aware of the injustices that Black and brown people face in the criminal justice system. He was tired and upset by what he was seeing happening both in San Francisco and across the country, and he wanted people to take notice. He's always taken action and simultaneously with his protests. So this idea that all he was doing was kneeling is just wrong. I mean, that was never the case with him at all.
And he made that clear from the beginning, too. People forget that.
Very beginning.
It was right after the game.
He said it multiple times, what this was about. And even to veterans in particular, and people serving and people who had served, he said that he didn't feel like America was holding up its bargain in terms of what they were really fighting for. So it was really out of respect to them as well. So with all that, being said, the NFL is being involved in social justice campaigns now, not because they suddenly saw the light, because they're using it as cover to suppress the voices of the players who want to speak out about it and use their platform to make people more aware. They don't want any protests on the field. They don't want players talking about police brutality and Colin Kaepernick after the games or during, media times. They want all of that to be pushed aside. And that's why they keep throwing money at it when they could have saved themselves a whole lot of money and a whole lot of bad headlines and bad publicity had they just done one simple thing, which is giving Colin Kaepernick a job. All this would have been not even happened.
Do you think he ever plays in the league again? I'm almost convinced that unfortunately, there's no chance he's getting back in.
I mean, zero. I mean, the thing is, the day I effectively knew that he would never play again, and keep in mind, when I knew or I felt like this would be true, I then only thought it was about a 10% chance he would play again. It became less than zero. Trump started him as a talking point in his rallies. That's when he's never playing again. Given the relationships that the owners have, not only with Donald Trump, and just their fear of Donald Trump and fear of the backlash that his supporters can create, even though ain't none of them turning the game off. I don't care what they say. The reality is that the NFL, and this is not something that they had to meet about, as the old adage goes, what's understood need not be said. It was understood that Colin Kaepernick is not to play again because he can't handle the pressure. Colin Kaepernick signed with a team tomorrow. Donald Trump is going to talk about that for 3 weeks, if not longer. It's going to become a talking point for him to win a re-election. And that's just one of a long list of reasons why the NFL, they don't want him back in the league. And even though they probably never expected that his collusion case went as far as it did before they eventually settled out of court, the NFL was happy to write that check to Colin Kaepernick. Happy to write.
Because they figured that would be it.
They figured that would be it. And they knew no owner was going to sign him because no owner was courageous enough to withstand the back and withstand the messiness of what that would entail. No owner, which says about them.
And it's mind-blowing because I see the mental gymnastics used to try to explain why he's not there. Yet I just saw the Eagles bring Josh McCown out of retirement to play for them instead of him, to see the Detroit Lions go get Tom Savage and Josh Johnson and all these other dudes. Nathan Peterman is still getting a paycheck in the NFL, and Colin Kaepernick is out here and perfectly capable of playing, even being out. In fact, he might be in at least a little bit better mental condition after not having been there for 2 years. And he's done. And it's kind of sad, but it's so baldly out there that they create all this, well, we're not sure if it fits our system and we consider everybody. That's bullshit. You don't, because if you do, you just signed him or at least brought him in for a workout. He can't even get a workout.
No, he can't even get a workout. No team offered him anything. And so, conveniently, I've seen so much misinformation about people like, oh, he wanted to be paid like a starter. Colin Kaepernick's team has never said anything about that. Or he would have cost too much money. And, I love the people who then switch it from, oh, he's too big of a distraction. Okay, so then you're admitting to me this wasn't a football decision, because they go hard in the paint and try to convince you it was a football decision. And then they move to the distraction card. And I'm like, well, which is it? Is it a football decision or is it not? Because if it's a football decision, you admit that he's better than all these other guys that have gotten opportunities in the league, and that he would make a team that at the very least needed a quality, experienced backup. And oh, by the way, one who was a pass away from winning a Super Bowl. You admit that he could help a team, but suddenly it's like he's too big of a distraction. It's like, well, then it's not a football decision, so therefore it's all bullshit.
If you put in a Colin Kaepernick GIF on Twitter, you'll see a myriad of the different crazy runs, crazy plays. The play he had in Green Bay where he ran through all 12 defenders, or all the scores in San Francisco. But someone's going to sit there with a straight face and tell me Dan Orlovsky's a better option than Colin Kaepernick. It's insane. And I'm not sure how much time you have left, and I know you're crazy busy. I got to ask two last things. You now deal more with politics. Obviously, at the Atlantic, you deal with politics, your sports, your culture. I've told my students, if you can cover sports, you can cover anything. What has been the biggest difference and similarity between covering sports and covering politics and other things outside of the sports window?
The difference is not necessarily the what, the difference is the where. And although structurally politics is set up much differently, it just in the sense that, you cover LeBron James, after every game he's got to talk. So you have just, it's like, if Elizabeth Warren gives a speech somewhere, that doesn't mean you get 5 minutes with Elizabeth Warren. You hope you do, but it's not a guarantee. And even when you look at this presidential administration and the reporters covering that, I mean, they don't have press briefings for months at a time. So, it's the access points are a lot different depending on, of course, what level of government or politics that you're covering. But as I said, the difference is really the where, because, leaving ESPN, which has, obviously made it clear about how they want to cover sports and politics, which is if it's newsworthy, and then they kind of want to leave it alone to a large degree, even when it is newsworthy, is that there's still a lot of landmines they feel like are there, and that, that I think people I know, I know people I know that work there are still struggling to kind of navigate. So they're not comfortable embracing this mixture and this clash that often happens. On the other side of the Atlantic, and it helps too that they're also not in partnership or a financial partnership with anybody that they cover. It's not like, the Atlantic is covering the White House, but also putting on the White House television show on its network. They
don't have an office in Trump Tower or anything of that nature. No. I mean, it's like, unfortunately, ESPN is very difficult because, the NFL is a partner. The NBA is a partner, so there's a transaction and an obligation financially that's there. And so they can journalism up to a point, but then they also have to protect their business relationship because that's just the way it works. The Atlantic is not like that. And so they can dig down there. I can dig down into some things that I couldn't dig down into before. And, I was coming freshly off of TV. I mean, for the most part, other than the months that I spent at the Undefeated, TV is a much different culture than, as you know, writing is, and especially writing at a place like the Atlantic. A lot of my bosses at the Atlantic have covered the White House. They've covered politics. They have been reporters. They're, so they kind of understand what we do and the kind of journalism that it takes to create the kind of product that they do. When you're in television, you may be on shows where every producer there is like between 25 and 28, and none of them have ever covered sports. Never been in a locker room. Don't understand the dynamic that's there between sports journalists and athletes. In some cases at ESPN, but it's not unique or germane to ESPN by any stretch. You have producers or people that are decision makers who are much more concerned about protecting the relationship with the athlete as opposed to, doing some real journalism. Access is something else.
Yeah, and that is not to say in print that's perfect either, because, I mean, it's a daily trade because that's part of the job. It's just, when you're dependent on a subject or a league or, a political entity for access, there's going to be some trade-offs. It's just that you hope you're not the one giving up the things that don't allow you to do your job in a credible way. So yeah, for me, it's not so much the subject matter, because I was always deeply interested in politics. That doesn't make me an expert. It just, makes me somebody who was just that. And I could always see the tentacles and the connective tissue between sports and politics and sports and social issues. So it's made it a lot easier to discuss those things openly. And, oh, by the way, to take those conversations and just generally talk about, politics. I mean, when I wrote the column for The Atlantic about the Obamas and that moment where they had to, at George H.W. Bush's funeral, and they had to greet the Trumps. And they did, the Obamas did what they do, which is, they were gracious and respectful. Meanwhile, Hillary was like, I ain't even looking over there. Like, she wasn't trying to be nice. Like that. She wasn't with it. she wasn't with it. She was just like, so after that lock her up shit, here's what I got for you. Not a hello. So, but the Obamas, when you're the first Black family in the White House, presidential family, you have a different responsibility. You're looked at differently. You have more at stake, and you're judged differently too. And that was kind of depressing, because I thought in that moment, given how Donald Trump essentially became president, one of the foundational reasons was because of the racist birtherism theory and the things that he said about Obama and the things that he said about their family overall, that had Michelle, been like, fuck you. She'd have had every right to do that. Right. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have blamed him at all if they told him to go sit and spin.
They didn't owe him anything. But the whole point is that because of, you're often in that position, just as a Black person, we can all relate to that, is that we often are forced in positions or asked to look and be more benevolent to people who really don't fuck with us. And we're, it's been, especially particularly the conversations about race and racism, is that, we are put in the awful position of having to be the peaceful ones, the benevolent ones. And when we're not that way, it's somehow a bad reflection of us and not on the racist, which is amazing to me. So they get a pass and they get to behave however they want and they get to be as racist as they want. Meanwhile, we got to sit there and just take it, or, sit there and use kindness to absolve them, which is crazy to me. So that's, to me, I mean, granted, that's not related to sports. It's generally just in politics, but it's also, to me, very relatable to the Black experience, or to the minority existence in this country. And so what I love about being at the Atlantic, I am oftentimes able to channel and to integrate all three, sports, politics, the Black experience. And kind of that was the case with the Jay-Z Colin Kaepernick column as well.
Always having to be the bigger person is the toughest possible thing. As much as I love Michelle Obama, the day she said, when they go low, we go high, it kind of made me cringe because of the being the bigger person thing. It's like, I get what you're saying, but damn, come on, because it burns you inside to see it. It burned the hell out of me. There's this picture not long after the election in 2016 of Trump sitting next to Obama, and the look on Obama's face when he has to shake his hand. That just cut me like a knife seeing that. So when you mention that, it sticks deep, and it is a part of the Black experience for as much as we don't want it to be at times.
Yeah,
so, we're stuck with it.
We're stuck with it, and I mean, I think that the worst part about any level of racial or racial injustice, misogyny, homophobia, any of those things, the worst part about it is that the people most victimized and oppressed by it, the people who have to withstand it and who are subjected to it, are the people who are then charged with the responsibility of solving it. And I just find that to be one of the most unfair, if not the most unfair thing about that entire conversation, is we not only have to deal with the trauma of racism as victims, as oppressed people, as people who are subjected to this in small and big ways, but then they come to us and ask us for solutions and put us on diversity panels and ask us how they can be better, as if I created this shit. Like, you figure out that on your own time, okay?
They put one of us on a diversity panel.
Yes,
if they don't put 5, if they put one of us on a diversity panel.
Oh, I mean, every Black person in America, I don't care if you took out trash for a living or a CEO or a supervisor, whatever it is, we have all been in that room, in that meeting, where we're the only Black person in the meeting, and something has happened, and they all looking at you to speak for all Black people. And it's just like, why is this my problem? Because you fucked up. Like, that ain't my problem. You know what I'm saying? If something goes, you know what I'm saying? Something goes wrong and you got an HR issue, suddenly y'all want me to be Ta-Nehisi Coates up in here. Okay, I don't think so.
As someone who has had to be that, when the problem with me is I'm not the most corporately easy to deal with. I say things that probably aren't very pleasant, and that's something for another discussion altogether. We got one last thing here, and it's maybe the most pressing question I've wanted to ask you: is it Popeyes or is it Chick-fil-A or is it Wendy's? Because I've seen you ride for Wendy's too.
So, full disclosure, I have not had the Popeyes chicken sandwich yet, but in part because during the week I tried to eat somewhat cleanly and just reserve all my ratchetness for the weekend. But and the other thing too is like just seeing videos and commentary from social media is like you got to be strategic when you go because they run it out of the sandwich quick every day, right?
I'm in Philly, and at least 3 of the spots in Philly are usually done by 5, 6 o'clock. I got lucky the other day and got one at 4:30 before I went into my other job. But yeah, they got the signs up saying we ain't got it right now.
So my plan is like this Sunday at like I'm gonna pick a very odd time at like 9:18 a.m. I'm gonna go and try to get me because it's a 24-hour Popeyes that's pretty close to me. So I'm gonna try to go get one in. But that being said, excluding Popeyes from this conversation, I have been saying, I have been on the record about this. And look, don't at me, don't debate me, debate your silly grandpa and his Pampers, okay? Wendy's spicy chicken sandwich is better than Chick-fil-A's. At best, Chick-fil-A is third in this conversation, all right? At best, I was like, Wendy's, I put it on everything I love. And when Black people say that, we serious. On everything I love, on my mama. Wendy's spicy chicken fillets or spicy chicken sandwich is better than Chick-fil-A. Another one, see, even though I know Bojangles kind of got run up out of this argument.
Yeah.
See, the argument wasn't about like Bojangles' regular chicken sandwich. What Bojangles needed to take to post a picture of instead of that, dry post-reconstruction ass sandwich that they put out there on social media, they needed to tweet a picture of a Cajun filet chicken biscuit sandwich. Man, listen.
That fights then we can have this conversation, is what you're saying. Put that up there, and now you're in the club. See, they came to the OK Corral with some rocks. Like the heavy artillery is that Cajun chicken filet sandwich. I had one at the Atlanta. My first one I had was at the Atlanta airport. This was like a couple years ago. And I then knew, like, if Jesus was a taste, I knew what it was. Because if you could put Jesus in a sandwich, infuse Jesus in a sandwich, it was that damn chicken. It was that Cajun chicken filet, that Cajun chicken biscuit from Bojangles. It was all my life. All my life got gathered in 2 bites. All my life. So it was everything. And so that's sort of my rankings of chicken at this point. It's really bad for Chick-fil-A that Popeyes has made this surge because as it was, there was a lot of us that were trying to, as he called it, we had to kind of have a certain mentality, or we had to really reconcile with some things because there's some problematic ass chicken because of who owns Chick-fil-A. So every day we go in there like, okay, or whenever we go to Chick-fil-A, it's just like, damn. I mean, even though I can like taste the racism, the reality is just like, you can just feel the homophobia and
the homophobia. I was like, oh, even though I know it's strong, it's like, but damn it, them chicken tenders is good as hell. So, it was a lot of us that was having to, go through mental issues as we go into Chick-fil-A and with their excellent service and happy smiles, but also, some of the worst people ever in terms of who owns them. So it's just like, but now we'll have to make that choice because we know what Popeyes is about. Popeyes is a pillar in our community, and it's open on Sunday. See, look. This is Popeye's moment, and I just want to be able to one day, tell the young folks who will not have experienced this great chicken sandwich war that I was there. I was there when Popeyes officially became the #1 chicken source in America.
And it's absolutely incredible. Jemele, please put over what it is that you're doing. I know you've got a podcast. You've got so much happening. I'm going to let you promote everything because I can't do it no justice.
Well, that's probably, you got 3 jobs. I feel like I got 672 jobs. But yeah, I mean, I'm, as you mentioned, we've talked about in this podcast, writing for The Atlantic. So you can definitely check out some of that work there on theatlantic.com. Also have a twice weekly podcast on Spotify. Download, subscribe. It's free. Got to say this because it's a lot of, the Apple folks is like, how come I can't get it on Apple? Well, Apple didn't write me the check. Spotify did. Sorry.
There you go.
Neither did Tidal. Sorry.
Cut the check. Cut the check, Apple. Cut the check. That's all you got to do.
So Spotify paid for this exclusivity. So that's where you can exclusively get it on Spotify. So twice a week. Like to have a lot of fun, had a lot of great and amazing guests. As of the taping of your podcast, it's a Wednesday. Tomorrow, a new episode drops with Robin Thede, the creator and star of a Black Lady sketch show on HBO. So hopefully you'll get a chance to check that out. But yeah, I've had a lot of amazing guests. Kamala Harris, Beto O'Rourke, Black Thought. I just kind of jump across the landscape between entertainment, music, sports, culture. So that's been a really fun outlet for me. And as I mentioned, working on the memoir as well, have a production company with another fellow Detroiter, Kelly Carter, another fellow Michigan Stater.
Mm-hmm. I know Miss Kelly. Shout out to Kelly Carter.
Yeah, so we have some very exciting projects that we're working on, including a comedy series we're developing with Sony and Gabrielle Union. So we're super excited about that. So just a lot of different things going on. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate people like yourself who been a day one and riding through me through the moments when the whole world was telling y'all I wasn't shit, I'm sure. So I appreciate the fact that you still hung in there and supported me, as well as, the city of Detroit itself. I mean, when I go back there, the amount of love that I feel from folks is tremendous. What Jay-Z and Beyonce say, I'm good on any MLK Boulevard. Man, I'm good on 6 Mile, 7 Mile, 8 Mile, Schaefer, Linwood,
Schoolcraft,
Eileen. I'm like,
you good on both Mac and Bewick. I know. I know
what I'm saying?
The thing is, Jemele, I consider myself fortunate enough to consider you a friend because that's what you are. And you're always going to be good with me. Whether you did this or not for me, you were always going to be good with me. But I will say personally, I take such great pride in what you've done and what you've been able to do. And to know that anybody who thinks you ain't shit, fuck them. Point blank. I'll say it. I'm going to say it. I'm putting it out there because you've always been good to me, and I always judge people on how they treat others. And you've always been good to everybody when they've deserved it. And that's the main thing. So I'm always going to ride with her. You know what she is on Twitter. She's Jemele Hill on Twitter. You're like the one name nobody has to say what your name is on Twitter because everybody.
Well, and then I also consistently have the same name on all my social media platforms. So it's not like you go to Facebook and it's, Jemele keeping it real all the time. Hill, like
Oh my God. No, you're everywhere. And I appreciate you coming on this momentous 100th episode of my podcast, JSC Radio. You were listed as like one of the 3 people I would love to have on here. And I'm through the roof that you've done this. Obviously, if I'm ever able to do anything for you, I'd be happy to come on your podcast when I'm finally important enough to do so. So
Stop it.
I'm working on getting there myself. But Jemele Hill, thank you so damn much for coming on JSC Radio with me.
I appreciate that. Anytime, fam.